Hey everybody, Doomwake here, and welcome back to another discussion video. And you might ask yourself, what are we discussing today? We are going to be having a discussion on the modern ban list. First and foremost, before we get started, I just wanted to say thank you guys for 15,000 subscribers. We just hit that awesome milestone recently, and I know that you guys have been loving the discussion style content. There seems to be a lot more engagement. The comments are much more positive, so I think over the course of the next couple of months or so, more discussion style content is going to be implemented. Could be modern, could be pioneer, could be other stuff. And I want to know what you guys would like me to discuss. Let me know in the comment section down below if there's any topics that you want me to go over, maybe some hot like Twitter topics or anything like that. But with all of that said, let us start by taking a look at the modern ban list. Now, the ban list has seen its share of ups and downs over the course of Modern's history. When Modern was first introduced way back in 2011, Modern has always had this sort of... It goes back and forth. I feel like before they didn't want it to be a turn 4 format, then it was a turn 4 format, then Fire Design Era and combo decks and all this stuff. So it's really hard to figure out exactly what the definition of Modern as of right now. I don't know if anybody in the world knows, even the people at Wizards who shape the format. I'm not sure exactly they know what they want Modern to be. I've divided the ban list into different sections of cards so we can go over some specific individual cards, but I've tried to group them as best I could. And the first group of cards is fast mana. So that includes Cloudpost is maybe a loose definition of the term fast mana, but Chrome Mox, Cloudpost, Mox Opal, Rite of Flame, Seething Song, Simian Spirit Guide, and Eye of Ugin. In a general sense, fast mana, not the best. Usually leads to a lot of turn 2, sometimes even turn 1 kills, especially once you get to the 1 mana stuff, Chrome Mox, Rite of Flame, Simian Spirit Guide. So I think as a general rule of thumb, fast mana that is this explosive, probably not the best for the modern format. We have Desperate Ritual, we have Pyretic Ritual, those are fine. I think that's basically the bar for fast mana. 2 mana investment plus 1 mana. But when you start to get into stuff, like I said, Rite of Flame, all the 0 mana stuff, it really just turbocharges all of these different combo decks. And we even saw a no ban list version or edition of the MTG of Masters, and there was a couple of Rite of Flame decks. I think there were 2. One was Oops All Spells, one was Belcher, and we're trying to shy away from fast mana. So I think all of these are off of the table. The one you could maybe potentially sell me on is Seething Song, because as we talked about, the Desperate and Pyretic Rituals, having to invest more mana up front makes them less explosive, but they're good in stuff like Through the Breach and Red Prison. So Seething Song, it would go into Belcher and other combo decks like that, but it wouldn't be as explosive as something like Rite of Flame or Chrome Mox or anything like that. But maybe Seething Song on the watch list, but for the most part, these cards are probably off limits. The second group of cards that I want to discuss is cards that make tournaments take too long. And this really all started way back in the day with Sensei's Divining Top, which, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Sensei's Divining Top was on the initial ban list, and it's definitely never been removed ever since, and I think they realized that when they first started the format. Second Sunrise is another card that's on this list, which was eventually banned after the Eggs Pro Tour that Stanislav Sivka won. And then the other 2 cards here, Krark Clan Ironworks, and this one might be a little bit more of a debate. It could potentially go into a different category, but Yorion the Sky Nomad. Now, these cards were, I'm not going to say only specifically banned for tournament logistical reasons, because Sensei's Divining Top, even though there's a lot of shuffling, it incentivizes lots of shuffling and fetch lands, which, to be fair, most modern decks do anyways, it's just an extremely powerful card. 1 mana to look at the top 3, and there are combos you can do at the top with cost reduction and weird stuff like that. Second Sunrise, to be honest with you, Second Sunrise might be one of the weakest cards, if not the singest individual weakest card on the ban list. But again, it was explicitly banned back in the day for making tournaments take too long. Same thing with Krark Clan Ironworks, just a lot of the same stuff. You don't want people taking 50-minute turns and having you go into time, and then you're looking at the clock and you're like, oh, it's 30 minutes over. Why is the round still going? And you can just go up to table 3 and see that there's a Krark Clan Ironworks player at 9-0 playing for day 2 or whatever. We don't want that kind of stuff. And Yorion is not quite as much as that, but again, 80 cards, incentivizes shuffling. It's really, really hard to shuffle an 80-card deck. I'm sure the Commander players in the comments will agree with me, and they have to shuffle a 100 card deck, not even 80 cards. I think that these should most likely stay banned, especially as we're already back in the full swing of things in terms of tabletop play, so these ones probably should stay banned for now. Okay, so the next group of cards here, these are free and or discounted cards. So the cards that I included on this particular category are Dig Through Time, Treasure Cruise, Mental Misstep, Gitaxian Probe, Once Upon a Time, and Fury. Now, Fury was banned for a different reason, not necessarily because it was a free spell, so maybe it should potentially go into the mid-range category, which is what we're going to talk about next. But for all intents and purposes, that category was already kind of high, so I figured I would lump it in with the free spells, even though it is maybe a little bit different. Gitaxian Probe and Mental Misstep, absolutely not. Just complete, utter design mistakes. They should have never been printed. I think we can agree with that. Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise, obviously, certainly design mistakes, and so long as there are fetch lands in the format, we can't really have this. And we see this in Pioneer, where Dig and Cruise are allowed to roam free, and maybe we can have a different conversation about Treasure Cruise and Pioneer, but for the most part, it's really only one deck utilizing it. It's not like every single deck can play Cruise, and when Cruise was in Modern, literally every single deck was splashing it. I mean, one of the best decks at the time was Burn, Splashing Cruise, and just because it's so effortless to do with fetch lands, it just doesn't cost you anything in terms of deck building. Once Upon a Time, probably want to lump that in with the design mistake category. 0 mana, look at the top 5, and just basically get anything. It really makes the decks like Amulet Titan and anything. Can you imagine Nadu with Once Upon a Time? I don't even want to live in that world. I also don't want to live in the Nadu world, but here we are. And yeah, Once Upon a Time, absolutely not. Just makes these combo decks too consistent and really low opportunity cost. Fury is a different animal. Honestly, I think they got the wrong guy. Fury was banned because of the utter and sheer dominance of the Rakdos scam archetype, but if we're being honest with each other, Grief was and still maybe is the problem. You could argue maybe Grief is not as good without Fury, but there are plenty of decks that utilize it. We've talked about Grief before. This is really specifically Fury. I'm not convinced that Modern would be necessarily worse off with Fury in the format. Sure, maybe people would go back to playing these more like Rakdos Scam style decks, but I would much rather play against Scam than some of the stuff that we're playing against now, like Storm and Nadu and things like that. So maybe Scam was the hero all along, and free my bar Fury. Well, I mean, I sold mine, but I'd rebuy them. I would live with them. But realistically, Fury was banned because they wanted to try to take the Scam deck down a notch, and they realized that they had a ton of things that were suppressing smaller creatures like Bowmasters, Fury, Renin 6, Lava Dart. At the end of the day, there's always going to be something in the format holding down smaller creatures. Fury maybe is the most upfront and in-your-face example of that, where if you play 4x ones and your opponent casts Fury, the game's over. But for the most part, I really feel like if they could go back in time, they would reverse the Fury ban and just ban Grief instead. And I think if you maybe swap those two, if they were to ban Grief, I could see Fury coming off. The next category, at least what I've labeled here, now this is a bit of a weird definition, and I use this term loosely, but I'm calling this the mid-range category. I'm going to list off the cards here. Deathrite Shaman, Oko Thief of Crowns, Mystic Sanctuary, Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath, Arkham's Astrolabe, Field of the Dead, Up the Beanstalk, Ponder, Green Sun Zenith, and Lurrus of the Dream Den. Now, obviously, you could actually Doomwake. This Militia belong in the other category. With some of these, like maybe Lurrus could be more of an aggressive card. Astrolabe in the tournaments take too long, but that's partly due to the Orion nature of things. But as far as this group of cards, I think there are certainly ones that stand head and shoulders above the rest. Oko, Mystic Sanctuary, where those two cards, absolutely not. Mystic Sanctuary, the fact that fetch lands exist, again, Mystic Sanctuary, legal and Pioneer, everything's fine. So as long as fetch lands exist, we can't have Sanctuary. Oko Thief of Crowns, maybe this is a bit of a hot take, so don't tell anybody that I told you this, but maybe the format could have Oko, but the problem with unleashing Oko into the world is that every single game feels the same. Every single game devolves into how many permanents can I put into play to force them to elk, and it's just a bunch of 3/3s versus a bunch of 3/3s, and those games just aren't that interesting, so it leads to some non-interesting games, so I'm fine with Oko being there, even though I think the format might have sped up a little bit for it, although Threat out a halfling, all that stuff. Deathrite Shaman, I actually kind of think Deathrite Shaman would be fine. It's extremely good, and the scary part about Deathrite Shaman is if you unleash Deathrite Shaman, some of the combo decks might start playing it. I think that's the big issue, where if it was just the mid-range decks like Jund and Grixis and all this stuff that played Deathrite, those decks are pretty good for the format. And I think those decks provide a much healthier gameplay and play patterns than some of the decks that we have in the format currently. The issue is what happens when the combo decks start playing Deathrite Shaman, which they inevitably will do. It's just too easy to splash. Now that I'm thinking about it, a lot of these cards are really only banned because of fetch lands, and I think Deathrite might be one of those. For now, probably best to keep it off. Uro is an interesting one because we have a sort of another analog in the form of Flage, which is a recent card from Modern Horizons 3, and honestly, you could even argue that in some spots Flage is better, where against the aggressive decks, Flage always draws you a Lightning Bolt. Uro didn't always draw you a Lightning Bolt. And on top of that, you can cast Flage, the escape half, off of Arena of Glory. Can't do that with Uro. I'm not going to say that Flage is definitively a better card, but I certainly think that there are situations and circumstances where Flage is better, and I kind of think Uro would be okay to remove, because again, it also breathes life into these mid-range decks, which, the way that Modern Horizons 3 has shaped the format, it's a lot about just pure aggression and combo. There's basically no mid-range decks, and I think unbanning a couple of cards from this list would certainly inject a lot of new life into these mid-range strategies. Which leads us to Arkham's Astrolabe, which is technically a mid-range card, but we've already been down this road. The problem with Arkham's Astrolabe is it makes the colors that you're putting in your deck just completely meaningless. You can just play a bunch of basic lands, always have access to all of your colors, never get screwed by Blood Moon or all these non-basic land effects, and that's one of the best ways to help punish these decks, trying to attack their mana, and Astrolabe just makes you look like a fool for doing that. Now again, if you wanted to introduce some life into the mid-range decks, Arkham's Astrolabe maybe is in the conversation, but I think that there are better ways to do that than the cheap cards. I would much rather unban a 2, a 3, or a 4 mana card than a 1 mana card, because it's a lot safer to do so, in my opinion. Field of the Dead, absolutely not. This is a mid-range card, but it's kind of more of an Amulet Titan card, and that was really what put it over the edge. But as far as mid-range card that bleeds over into combo decks, if Deathrite Shaman was the example, this is that times 10. So, Field of the Dead, powerful card, probably got to keep that one on the ban list. Up the Beanstalk is maybe one that you could talk me into more if you're going to leave Fury off, because without Fury, there's not really as much to enable Up the Beanstalk. There's, Solitude, Leyline Binding, and that's kind of really it. So, if you're going to leave Fury, I could maybe see an argument for Up the Beanstalk. Ponder is in the mid-range category because I just didn't really know where else to put it. Ponder is a better card than Preordain, but I don't think it's enough to have one banned and one not banned. Ponder honestly should probably be in the tournaments take too long because it does involve a lot of shuffling, but again, every deck has fetch lands, so are you really increasing the timer on the round by that much with one, maybe two extra shuffles a game? Hard to say. Green Sun Zenith is another weird one, and I feel like one that a lot of people try to advocate for time and time again. The mid-range decks are not going to be the ones playing this. It's going to be Nadu and Amulet Titan. So, yeah, it does provide a lot of consistency for those combo decks, and Green Sun Zenith, we envision Green Sun Zenith for Tarmogoyf, and then the next turn I have an extra mana and I can Green Sun Zenith for Tireless Tracker. No, people will just be getting Dryad of the Elysian Grove and killing you on turn 3. So this one probably has to stay there for a little bit longer. And then Lurrus at the Dream Den, this one's tough. It was a problem before the Companion Errata, and then they errated Companions, and it was still kind of a problem. But with the speed of the current format, I might be interested in Lurrus. Again, I want to breathe a bunch of new life into these mid-range decks because I feel like the format has just become too fast with Modern Horizons 3, and I think a couple of the cards in this section could certainly help with that. Lurrus, again, you run the risk of maybe it's being played in combo decks, but it's not like it's enabling a combo in and of itself, similar to, the Green Sun Zenith or Field of the Dead stuff. So, I don't know. I could be interested in having a conversation about Lurrus. All right, the next category, I like to call this the Orcish Bowmaster category. So Umezawa's Jite and Punishing Fire. I guess there is some concern with unbanning Umezawa's Jite because combat just becomes nearly impossible. Well, now that I think about it, maybe Jite is a little bit too good in the Boros energy deck. So maybe Jite is off the table specifically, but Punishing Fire I think would be totally fine. That's another card that really gives a new angle of attack for these mid-range decks. So we had some issues in the previous category where a lot of the mid-range cards can be utilized in combo decks. Punishing Fire, not really. It's a really expensive way to start killing small creatures. It does really shrink the game down in terms of what the relevant cards are and what your opponent actually cares about. But as far as giving new life into mid-range decks, I think Punishing Fire would be okay. Next category is one that I am labeling, these are not real Magic cards. Bridge from Below, Mycosynth Lattice, and Skull Clamp. So Skull Clamp is technically a real Magic card, but Skull Clamp is basically misprinted. If you open a pack of Magic cards and you see a Skull Clamp and you look at the current text on it, you would assume that can't be what the real card is, and that it's just a misprinted version of that specific card. Never, ever, 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 obviously. Mycosynth Lattice, it's not a Magic card because it's only good with Karn, right? You're not ever playing Mycosynth Lattice in your 6-mana artifact EDH deck. You're only getting it to lock people out with Karn, so especially with how much they push Tron with MH3, I'm all set with Mycosynth Lattice staying on the list. And then as far as Bridge from Below, I've heard some arguments about this one. I think it would be okay, breathing a little bit of life into these sacrifice graveyard-style decks, Greater Gargadon, and Carrion Feeder, all that kind of stuff. It would probably be okay, but it is not a Magic card, so it's tough for me to advocate for it. I think my final decision, if you had to make me choose, would be it's probably okay to unban, but I would not be shocked if it was a problem down the road again. I put Twin in its own category because why the hell is this thing still banned? Remove it from the ban list. Nobody would even play it. Now we need to discuss the artifact lands. These were, I believe they were on the initial ban list because they were worried about affinity with Mox Opal, Arcbound Ravager, things like that. They did eventually ban Mox Opal. The problem with artifact lands at this point is I think they've printed enough good things that work with artifacts, especially the affinity cards in recent Horizon sets, like I think Kappa Cannoneer. I guess Kappa Cannoneer is kind of the same thing because you can tap mana for it, but like Kappa Cannoneer, Thought Monitor, Nettle Cyst, Urza, Emery, like this core of cards. Now, the question is that stuff good enough even with artifact lands without Mox Opal? Because I think a lot of people thought that affinity was going to be a big thing with Kappa Cannoneer in MH3, and it really hasn't done that much. So maybe the artifact lands are kind of okay if you don't have Mox Opal. They do turbocharge Urza Saga, but maybe that's okay. I'm trying to think, and let me know in the comments below if there's any combo decks that would benefit from artifact lands. I guess Hammer Time maybe, and maybe there's a couple of other ones that I'm missing, but I wouldn't mind giving a little bit of help to affinity. Maybe you unban like the single worst artifact land and see what happens, but you could maybe talk me into having a conversation about these. Maybe not all 5 at once, but maybe like a slow trickle. And that, my friends, leads us to the biggest category of them all. This is what I have labeled as combo cards. I may have used the term combo a little bit loosely, so bear with me. Birthing Pod, Blazing Shoal, Dark Depths, Dread Return, Golgari Grave Troll, Faithless Looting, Glimpse of Nature, Hogak, Arisen Necropolis, Hypergenesis, Summer Bloom, Tybalt's Trickery, and Violent Outburst. Let's start with the easy ones. Dark Depths? No, absolutely not. Hogak? Absolutely not. Okay, those are the 2 easy ones. Just take them, throw them in the dumpster fire. They're gone for good. We can't have those. I guess you can probably put Dread Return in there too. Dread Return is sort of not a Magic card in the same sense of the previous tier, where you're not ever casting the card for its mana cost. You're just doing it when you flip your entire deck over and flip 3 Narcomoebas. So yeah, Dread Return is probably in that camp. The issue with Dread Return is the Oops All Spells decks can kill without it, but they have to play like 12 or 13 cards that have no text, as opposed to Dread Return, where all they have to do is play 3 Narcomoeba, 1 Return, and maybe a Bridge from Below, and they're good to go. So it just makes those packages much smaller, and then they can play much more interaction. So I'm kind of off Dread Return now that I'm thinking about it again. Birthing Pod is an interesting conversation where Yawgmoth, for a while prior to MH3, was one of the best decks in the format. And if you go take a look at metagame snapshots from the past couple of weeks, where'd it go? And I think that people were off having conversations about Pod when Yawgmoth was one of the best decks. But now that those creature combo decks, I mean, I shouldn't say creature combo decks have fallen into favor because, we have a bird problem. Oh, wait, no, we can't have Birthing Pod with Nadu. But assuming that Nadu inevitably gets banned, because it's going to, can we have Birthing Pod in Nadu-less Modern with Yawgmoth and stuff? It's really close because it's really good with stuff like Stranglergeist and Young Wolf, and there's a lot of cards that have been printed in MH2 and MH3 that just make extra game objects, and maybe that's too much stuff for Birthing Pod, but I wouldn't mind giving a shot in the arm to Yawgmoth. Blazing Shoal, I'm going to blow your mind here. Blazing Shoal is worse than a card that is already legal in Modern that has not seen play in at least a year, and that's Hammer Time. I've always said this before, Blazing Shoal is just a worse Colossus Hammer. It's a Colossus Hammer that is more conditional. You have to play these completely uncastable red cards. Blazing Shoal doesn't necessarily lead to some interactive games, but as far as specifically looking at other cards that are legal, you can make a direct comparison of it being worse than a card that is already legal. So I'd be fine with Blazing Shoal. Golgari Grave Troll. So we're going to do this song and dance again? They've already unbanned it twice. Even if you came to the conclusion that Golgari Grave Troll was fine in the format, they've already unbanned it twice. What possible reasoning could they ever have to unban it a third time? Not worth it. Faithless Looting. Now this is a weird one, where if people were only doing Arclight Phoenix things with it, I'd be okay with it. The problem is, the people who are going to be casting Faithless Looting are the ones who are discarding Atraxa and Gristlebrand, and either having Goryo's Vengeance or Persist. And I don't know if we want more of that kind of stuff in the format. The Goryo's deck is already very, very good. We don't need to make it a little bit better. And you're incentivizing the gameplay that we're trying to avoid by unbanning some of these midrange cards, or at least that's what my theory is. A world that I can envision where we make midrange a little bit better and neuter the combo decks a little bit. We don't need to make the combo decks better. They're already really good. Hypergenesis, I'm going to be honest with you, forgot this was even a Magic card. We already have Glimpse of Tomorrow legal, and I think Glimpse is probably just a better Hypergenesis, so maybe this is like the Blazing Shoal versus Colossus Hammer argument, where you already have a card that is a better version of the ban card, but it's not leading to the best gameplay, so probably better to keep it there for posterity's sake. Maybe Summer Bloom? No thanks. We've been down this road before. Amulet Titan is way too good with Summer Bloom. They just cast it on turn 2, and they more consistently get to the 6 mana required for the turn 3, turn 2, sometimes even Primeval Titan. And now with Urza Saga to find Amulet, we almost certainly cannot have Summer Bloom. Tibalt Trickery, extremely glass cannony, but do we really want to be promoting that sort of gameplay? And then last but not least, Violent Outburst. As somebody who played this card religiously for the better part of 2 years, I'm here for it. Realistically, I think the reason that we have to keep this card on the ban list is more so Living End than it is Crashing Footfalls. They certainly both are culprits, but instant speed, wrath your board, plus get back 20 power is just a little bit too much. If it were just Footfalls, maybe I could see Outburst being okay, but when it's both Footfalls and Living End, it's a little bit too much pressure to put on the format. And there you have it, folks. We have gone through the entire Modern ban list with no cards left to spare, and I gotta say, initially when I was going into this, I thought that there was going to be a lot more things that I would consider having a conversation about, but there's really not that many. The ban list is actually not as bad as I thought it was going to be. If you forced me to pick 5 cards from the ban list that I would say, you can unban those today, no issues. Punishing Fire, Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath, Blazing Shoal, Fury, and Splinter Twin. Hashtag free twin. Let me know in the comments section down below, which cards do you think should stay on the ban list forever? Which ones do you think maybe would not even make that much of an impact, or potentially could get unbanned today and maybe make a little bit of an impact, which is honestly probably the best outcome when you unban a card. Don't have it be too dominant, but have it show up a little bit. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you thought in the comment section down below. Like, subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. Adios.